Well, with that, we're going to move on to our next speaker, whose name is Peter Hoover, and he's going to be speaking of his paper is called Auroville: Problems, Potential, and Insight for a Modern World. A little bit about Peter. He's a graduate student in the Asian Contemplative and Transcultural Studies program. While currently focused on Eastern thought, his wider aim and joy is exploring spiritual and mythological traditions from around the world so that he may embody a more poetic, imaginative, and intuitive consciousness. Outside of his studies, Peter is a K-12 educator, spiritualist minister, and emotional intelligence coach. Motivating all his pursuits is the desire to teach, heal, integrate, and serve. Over to you, Peter.
All right. So just a check here. Can everyone, my screen is sharing okay?
Yes.
Sounds okay? Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Let's synchronize watches here. 20 minutes. All right. So, yeah, I'm very happy to be broadcasting to you all here from Columbus, Ohio. And, you know, a year ago, I didn't even know that Auroville existed. And I feel somewhat humbled, kind of speaking of many of you who have studied or lived or have a very deep experience of Auroville. But I'll share what I've taken with me. And so my impression in this moment is of Auroville as a very fascinating microcosm, and that so much of the world's problems are fully on display there, but also its potentials, and it's as a source of insight. And so Mother, you know, going all the way back to its founding, had Auroville to be this cradle of a new consciousness. As Deepti was sharing, she's kind of the one who took the integral yoga out of the ashram and founded Auroville. And, you know, what happens when we take away these common frames of creed, of politics, of nationality, and try to realize human unity? And that's kind of this spark that Auroville represents. And so I had the chance to go with this lovely group there in the summer semester of 23 to see. Many of them are kind of in the peanut gallery in the Devashish Banerjee screen. You know, going to Auroville, I had this daydreams of spiritual awakenings and philosophical insights. And what was interesting for me, what I most took away, had to do with this more the grit of local politics. As has kind of been mentioned, Auroville's sort of teetering on the brink here, a little bit of an existential crisis. Will it be able to continue in the mission it was found? And though it's a small town, only about 3,300 Aurovillians, it asks really big questions. And that's really what I want to explore with you all today. Three kind of levels. The first level is the societal level, this cradle of a new consciousness. Can it survive in a world that's run on nationalism, consumerism, and fundamentalism? Devashish spoke this morning about sort of the ontology of ownership. Can Auroville survive in this world? The next is, you know, interpersonally. If it can survive, what kind of community is that going to be? And what is going to be the relationship between the individual and the collective in that community? And then lastly, intrapersonally. What does it look like for an individual for this new consciousness to emerge? And Jonathan was sharing some very interesting things this morning about that topic. And so, you know, many people today are questioning modernity, looking for a better world. And what answers does Auroville have to offer? So that's going to be exploring. But before I kind of dive into these questions, I think it's important to set some context, especially for those watching who aren't all the way familiar with what Auroville is all about. So I'm going to just do one kind of historical slide all the way back to the very beginning. Auroville began in 68 with, you know, barren land, a banyan tree, and a dream. And the people building Auroville not only had to make this intentional town, but build an ecosystem from scratch. And though there was definitely ups and downs in those early days, through enthusiasm and optimism, they worked some amazing things. 55 years later, the project's still going. Auroville has planted 3 million trees and transformed the landscape to this afforestation success story. We're talking about sustainability. That's what the conference is about. And so Auroville has received international recognition about sustainability, renewable energy. Lakshmi spoke on architecture. That's another thing Auroville is very recognized by. And so the kind of question is, Auroville has been very successful at transforming the landscape. Well, what about the mindscape? You know, how successful has it been in transforming that? And so that has been a more kind of a mixed bag. And so I want to speak just briefly about the government of Auroville. Since 1988, there was an act of Indian Parliament, the Auroville Foundation Act, that Auroville is administered by a governing board, a international advisory council, both of which are appointed by the central government, and then the residents' assembly. And so though there's been a lot of progress Auroville has made, there's been also some discontent. And I'm in like three main areas of discontent. One of them is around some of the bureaucracy of the residents' assembly. One of the former secretaries quipped that Auroville's residents' assembly had all the bureaucracy of India, Indian national government, and then a whole other layer on top of that. And so when you're trying to like bring together from people from all over the world with all different motivations and goals, getting everyone on the same page is difficult. And so there's been some important things that have been left undone. And so kind of a second reason is the purchase of the land. Auroville is about 5 kilometers across, 20 square kilometers, and not all of that land has been purchased. Only about 50% of it has. And so that will kind of create some troubles, as we'll see. And then the last kind of issue that's kind of churning up the mix is the mother kind of spitballed this number: 50,000 people will live in Auroville. And right now there's only about 3,300. So many people are asking, you know, hey, where's the city? So into that kind of seed of discontent, there's now, especially as time goes on, more and more pressure building up. And also kind of 3 factors that I want to mention here. One is just straight up population. So the nearby town of Pondicherry, in 1968, the population of Pondicherry was about 115,000. By 2028, it's expected to surpass 1 million. So now there is a lot more people in that same region. Another thing is partly because of some of the success Auroville has had in developing the city, the price of land in Auroville has gone up 500% in the last 10 years. And so all these developers are kind of swooping in, buying up land, building houses, and using sort of the greenery and cultural activities of Auroville as selling points. So this kind of ontology of ownership is really coming up big. And then a third kind of factor is the growth of the middle class. There was a 2018 study that the middle class in India grew 25-fold in 25 years. And by 2027, they'll have the biggest middle class in the world. And so what that translates to Auroville as is tourists. There are about 2,000 tourists that come to Auroville each day. That number can flex upward, certainly larger of that number. But when our group was in Auroville, the president of India, President Murmu, remarked about spiritual tourism, and that this fast-growing trend can be a way to bring socioeconomic development to the region. And you know that socioeconomic boon is not the reason that Auroville was founded, and it was to kind of be this cradle of new consciousness. And so with all those pressures and all those kind of discontents, in 2021, new secretary and governing board were appointed by the central government. You see over here, far, I think, left on your screen is Dr. Jayanti Ravi. She's the secretary of Auroville. And in the middle, this gentleman here, Chairman Sri Aurobindo Ravi. He's the governor of Tamil Nadu and also the chairman of the board. And one of the things that has happened is their administration, if they've come in with all these developmental pressures and they've taken some actions to develop that have created kind of the current crisis that Auroville is in, a lot of this centering on what's called the crown. Auroville has 4 zones, residential, international, cultural, that are connected by the crown. And even to this day, that Auroville is 55 years old, there's not a one actionable, legal, fully developed plan for what the crown development should look like. What would that look like? Well, you'd have to get the approval of the state government. There's certain urban planning that has to be done, environmental planning that has to be done. And oh, by the way, there's the residents' assembly. The people who live there should have a say in what gets developed. And rather than sort of go stepwise through all of those things, the governing board took in another approach, and that was to send in bulldozers. And this is an interesting approach in which they just kind of sent 900. They sent in they bulldozed 600 square meter strip, took out 900 trees, the youth center in Auroville. And as you see, the Aurovillians were not too thrilled about this prospect and were protesting. So, you know, what's the governing board to do if your construction project is being obstructed? And they've come up with all sorts of creative solutions. Some of those include bulldozing at like 1 a.m. Others of them include like using the police or thugs from very outlying villages to sort of break things up. And you know, there's other options. You could threaten visas. You could suspend the living stipend, threaten people's housing. You know, sprinkle in a few bogus criminal charges. Really, just kind of creating this general atmosphere of fear and kind of strife is kind of their approach. So, having done that, there was another kind of development. This was in May of 2022. The Residents' Assembly. There's one kind of important liaison between the residents and the governing board, and that's the working committee that has 7 members. So there was a vote of no confidence where each of the members had to be justified. And there were somehow, not exact, there were 4 members who were kind of pro-governing board, pro-secretary. And they were like voted clear out of the, by 80 and 90% margins. It was a huge statement for those who were supporting what the secretary and governing board would do. Meanwhile, there were 3 who kind of opposed, who were kept in by 90% approval rating. So it was a very clear, like, who's in, who's being chosen by the residents and who is not. Well, you're the governing board. What's the governing board to do if all the people in favor of you have been voted out? And what the solution has been is basically the 4 ousted representatives have been sort of reconstituted their own residents' assembly filled with other delegates who are kind of supportive of the governing board. And there's been all these kind of this whole second government that's been created, a whole second funds and assets committee, budget committee, housing board, town development committee, all these things, a whole second basically government that is going to rubber stamp, but more or less systematically is excluding the will of the residents in their own governance. And so that is kind of what, in summary, what the hubbub is about, and is the backdrop for some of these questions. It's with all that going on, then what do these questions look like? And so I'm going to take them one by one. So socially, about with all the, you can see that nationalism, consumerism, and fundamentalism, there's still this pressure, and even, you know, as time goes on, it's even more so. So some of the things that Auroville has done successfully has been their advocacy, especially in the judiciary. They've taken the governing board to court twice. Once the National Green Tribunal regarding the bulldozing of trees, and the other is to the High Court in Madras, which is what you see on the screen, around the administrative overreach. And those cases are still being litigated. I was actually listening in. the Madras case will be next, I think next Tuesday or this next Wednesday, Tuesday or Wednesday, and then a week following the National Green Tribunal. And so while this advocacy is necessary, even if things roll in the most favorable way for Aurovillians, there's still all these pressures that are going to be on the community. Commercial pressures, capitalist pressures, tourists coming in. And so that's why I think especially interpersonal is I think the question that's really mattering the most right now. You know, we talked about some of the struggles the Residents' Assembly has had, and you know, transcultural work is hard work. It gets really messy at times. You know, building a utopia would be so much easier if everyone was already enlightened. But as it is, you know, people from very different perspectives are needing to come together and figure things out. Now, Auroville has made real breakthroughs, and like I said, in sustainable energy, architecture, and sustainability. And one of the things that I found sort of most exciting in all this that's going on is sort of the breakthroughs that they're making in good governance. One of the programs that they're undertaking is it's called Dream Weaving and Citizens Assembly, whereby they're bringing in experts, they're bringing in community members, they're bringing in people who have especially vocal opinions, all to come together. And they're really saying, okay, what is it that people want? What is it that Auroville was founded on? How can this develop? And sort of through a process of listening and conversation and just really seeing what all the opinions are, they're making steps to come to solutions. And I think kind of hearing about this, I was really encouraged about some of the work they're doing. I think right now, the residents, in terms of what type of the community they need to be, sort of in their past, Auroville has had some radical days where it was like, this is what we're doing. This is everybody had to be this way. And if anything, it's kind of swung the other way, that it's a little, maybe almost too much kumbaya, where everybody's doing their own thing, but can enough people kind of come together and really make an effective stand? And I think striking that balance is what this shakeup is forcing to happen. And intrapersonally, you know, what does it look like for a new consciousness to arise? One of the things that stuck with me as I was speaking to an Aurovillian who's kind of very active in all this process was along this line. Is that what she said is, many people in Auroville are spiritually seeking. They have their own processes. They're going after the divine in a way that is making sense to them, whether it's Sri Aurobindo, not Sri Aurobindo, the mother, not the mother. But one of the things that's been lacking was individuals building a community that then supports the individual. And she said, if you just have individuals going their own way and not really building up a community, then what you have is this very atomized group of people. And then anybody who has a bulldozer or enough money or a very strident view can come in and sort of hijack the agenda. And so one of the things that I think is very important is this realization of the need for the individuals to build collectives that support individuals. Because the individual is the base, but if the individual tries to do it alone, it will be hijacked. And so I want to kind of conclude with a few thoughts that I found very interesting quotes from the mother. So three slides here. So there are 12 qualities of the Divine Mother. And I think that what are sticking out for me as particularly relevant. And one of them, the first is sincerity. She has this quote, Auroville will become what it must be only if and when the people living there will stop lying. And so there's, in Auroville, there's these kind of, especially from some of the governing board, listening to what they're saying, there's this disingenuousness, kind of this false framing, where it sounds right, but when you see the wider context, it doesn't look right. Or people taking positions that are popular, but not really what's in their heart. And so I think in terms of, especially considering what Jonathan was speaking about this morning, there's a deep philosophical work, or some of what Deepti was talking about, this deep going into the work, but on some, and all that needs to happen under critical mass, but immediately stop lying, I think is one pretty good important thing to say. Another quote she had was, does Auroville depend on human effort? No, thank God, was her response. And this could be like maybe humility or receptivity, which are also qualities of the mother, but I chose aspiration. As I read this, if grace comes down from on high and saves Auroville, that's great. But what I think the mother is really saying is, rather than the divine from above, the divine within is what's going to save Auroville. And that process of the divine within coming out in humanity is really what she had absolute trust in. Finally, the quality of perseverance. Right, there's some dark days that Auroville is going through right now, but it's not really, even if things turned out the best with regard to the governing board and all the cases, this isn't going to be solved today, tomorrow, with the next court ruling. This is really a long-term process. The real Auroville will manifest only after about 200 years. And so if there's one spiritual practice that I think is important regarding Auroville, it's this kind of keep on keeping on. So with that, may Auroville be continued. I will pause there. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter, for that lively presentation. And
lively and lovely.
yes, and so I'm going to again encourage people, our attendees here, to type in some questions, and I'll field those. But in the meantime, let's open the floor. Any of our panelists would like to engage with Peter?
So can I kind of controversially ask a question? There is one thing I actually have regarding the dream process. So there's one, I'm gonna share my screen. Hold on, come back here. So I was watching today on dream weaving, and there was one interesting thing I noticed, and that was one of the people here is actually part of the dream weaving process. And Deepti, I think you were as well. And so my question, well, two questions. First, what is your shampoo? Because your hair looks amazing in that picture. But secondly, like I heard that it was starting up again, that there was a dream weaving 2.0. If you have any updates or about your experience, I would really love to hear.
So I was part of the dream weaving process as part of the Citizen Assembly team. There was the intention of doing another process with a wider pool of experts and people who are interested in working in this area. But I guess there are many complications actually. And I think it has to also do with this ownership idea of, even if somebody runs that process, who owns that process? And I think a lot of people are trying right now in Auroville to straddle this sort of polarization, which has happened in the community in the last couple of years. And more, I think we are coming to this understanding that somehow, because like you were mentioning, Peter, that, the court cases and things like that, personally, and I don't know, I mean, Aditi and I had a conversation about this, but personally, I think irrespective of whoever wins, we are not going to win, because this is something that we have to live with, and we have to find a way to work with this somehow, because this is not going away. So, and Auroville has had challenges even before the government came in. So I think a lot of us are trying to somehow come to a center where we can appreciate what's going on either side and try to bring these voices together. So with that, I think it's very, very difficult then, if you have a personal opinion, to hold that space. And I think with the dream weaving and citizen assembly, that's the challenge we faced. We couldn't, as a team, take a very neutral stand and hold that process in its full integrity, while also having our own opinions about it, about the situation. And in that sort of situation, with utmost sincerity, we all felt that we could not hold that process and still say that we are neutral, because we felt strongly about the whole situation, either this way or that way. So because of that, then several different things happened, and there was a split between the citizen assembly and the dream weaving team for a while, and then the whole process was reimagined, and it is going on. The dream weaving, not as a dream weaving process, but now there was a presentation a few months back. I think I can share that with maybe with Jonathan, or I don't know, with somebody who can share it with the other people. And they're proposing a larger process, and that is again to do with the individual, and not so much about finding solutions outside, but how can we become more self-aware and change from within, and then see how that manifests as a collective. So they have a program called self-education, which is going on right now, which has started I think last week, which has a series of different processes to get people to learn more about themselves and their life in Auroville, and from that build on something more positive.
Can I add something? I would look at it that it was the first time, one of the problems is from the time Auroville started, which means I've watched it over 48 years, that we don't recognize the importance of collective spaces and how we should speak into the collective spaces. I think indigenous societies and even sometimes spiritual societies from the Christian world and others know how to address a collective space. And in Auroville, as its freedom is the fundamental truth, people don't realize how badly they can speak and mess up the collective space. What dream weaving brought, and I think that learning is not lost on Auroville, is that nobody was permitted to criticize what someone else said. You received it, and if it worked for you, you adopted it. If it didn't work for you, you kept quiet. And I think that standard of collective behavior in a collective conversation is fundamental to the future. So I don't see it as a failure. I see it as a great learning. Anshul was much more, I was an observer and participant rather than an organizer. So Anshul was part of the organizing team, so he knows more deeply. But for me, whether we've been arguing about the town and the design of the town and who's in charge of it since Auroville started. The argument is going to go on, but something is growing deeply. And I feel a wisdom has come into how we should use collective spaces, which has come as a result of this kind of pressure. So that's perhaps why the pressure is there, to teach us to find another dimension of being with each other, and recognizing how precious and sacred a collective space is.
Thanks, Deepti. Peter, do you have anything you wanted to close with, and any response there, and we can move on?
Well, it's sort of interesting to hear your responses, especially how the video closed. I think this was about a year old, the documentary that's on YouTube, and where it is now. It's just, it's kind of it's a more of a messy long-term thing, and sort of that, even though a lot of the good happened there in terms of immediately fixing this solution, is, I guess that makes sense. It's not quite the encouraging word I was hoping for, but if all goes downhill, Anshul, I'm sure Bollywood is calling. Come on, I'm sure that voiceover, it is. So, look, that's all I got.